You're listening to or watching Strangers in Space, and for the next 60 minutes, I'm not going to do the same as I did last week. We're going to be talking about Once Upon Time, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR. You're right,
Hello,
Matt.
I'm Lee.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Simon.
Okay, right. Last time I did a thing for about AI scores for about 3 minutes before we started, maybe about 5 minutes. This time I'm going to do a thing about AI scores for about 10 seconds before we start. I'm going to predict, and I don't think I'm going to be alone in this, that the AI score for this episode is going to be the lowest of the new series to date, because I suspect a lot of casual viewers will be a little bit flummoxed by that episode. Although I didn't find it hard to follow. Before we talk about whether we enjoyed it or not, did anybody here find it hard to follow?
No,
No?
don't think so.
Right, okay. I thought it was fairly easy. It didn't tell you at the start. You had to sit there for about 10 or 15 minutes before it started to tell you what was going on. But once it started to tell you what was going on, I thought that made perfect sense of what you'd seen so far. And then it became pretty easy to follow from that point forwards. It's just that before we started, I went on Facebook for a few minutes while I was waiting for us all to be gathered. And quite a few of the comments I saw where I couldn't follow that. Well, I have no idea what was going on.
Well, I mean, it made it pretty clear from the beginning that this was going to be a time out of joint, weird story involving sort of flitting between locations. So if you're expecting that, then you can't find it difficult to follow. If it does that, you can find it mysterious because it's difficult to know what's going on in terms of the individual scenes. But you know,
It was
that's
a
what it's supposed to
a
be.
mystery
Like
was set up, and it was played out fine. I think if you're a casual viewer, you probably got lost. But as a Doctor Who fan, there's no reason why you should have got lost. We've had more complex and stuff from a few years back from Stephen Moffat.
I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that's right, Lee. I don't think there was anything more. I think there were maybe things that were. I think there were maybe things that were on the surface of it slightly more complicated, but generally speaking, you'd get the ground rules going in and you'd be able to follow what was happening. I think this was. I've only written a few things down to make sure I don't forget to say them or to bring them up. One of the things I've put was it's hard to believe that was broadcast on BBC One on a Sunday evening at more or less prime time, because that was so far out of the comfort zone of, I don't know, Country File and Antiques Roadshow. It's untrue. And I do think that was probably the most difficult Doctor Who episode in terms of not in terms of being able to follow it if you were sitting there watching it and engaging with it, but for a lot of people who sit down on a Sunday evening, either having their dinner or just done the washing up or whatever, and are just sitting down to watch something for 50 minutes that they think is going to be a bit fun and a bit hokey and take them to, outer space or back in time or whatever.
It did all those things.
But it would have been confusing, is my point. And so hence my point about the AI scores. So I do think that was more confusing, generally speaking, than a Stephen Moffat episode, because the Stephen Moffat episode generally nods the wink at the start and lets you know what it's going to do before it does it. Whereas I don't think this did. I think what this did was it threw you into the middle of it and then made you catch up after. And like I say, I think once it started giving you the stuff to catch up, it was easy enough to catch up as long as you were engaged with it. I think Doctor Who fans, who are generally speaking engaged with Doctor Who, shouldn't have struggled with it. I think maybe casual viewers possibly would. We'll see what happens with the AI score. I don't think it's important. And, going for myself, so now I'm going to go round in a circle. Did we enjoy it? Go for myself. Yeah, loved it. I thought that was a terrific episode of Doctor Who, frankly. Lee?
Exactly the same.
Okay, Simon?
Yeah, I was going to say with the previous bit of conversation was that it's like a jigsaw puzzle. It's like looking at a jigsaw puzzle and saying, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, it does want pieces
so
of
in which case we know it's going to come together and we know it's going to make sense. So of course there's great joy in looking around and seeing all the little funny coloured pieces and think, oh, what could that be? So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And yeah, you're right, it was a complete lesson in not treating the viewer like an idiot.
Yeah, absolutely. For Doctor Who, a period of Doctor Who that has kind of spelled things out a bit, especially earlier on, it was amazing to see something that really let the viewer work with it to make sense of the story like this did. Matt, what did you think?
Oh, I didn't like it as much as last week, or as much as the week before. I think it's the weakest one so far. But again, it's part 3 of a 6-part story, so it kind of depends. I've got a nasty feeling that they're not going to do anything particularly with it. That this moment of jeopardy resolved. So yeah, a bit underwhelmed.
Oh, you think this moment of jeopardy resolved?
Yeah.
No, because what's happened here is, I didn't find that at all. I think the point this story was making is that you can't repeat the past, and that if you try to repeat the past, it's going to come back and bite you. So I think the point of this episode was it's a red herring that she's solved the issue with Swarm and Azure, and that Swarm and Azure are going to be back in episode 6, having not been resolved. I thought that was the point.
I don't think they're not going to come back, but I think the idea that time is out of whack, so the flux has taken out space. So we've definitely got a post-flux apocalypse in terms of space, but in terms of time's been saved. So they did that in an episode, and so now we're dealing with the space side of flux.
Oh yeah. Oh, and this is what we said last week. We expected a certain amount of resolution this week, so that the story in the last 3 episodes could be a different story from the story in the first 3 episodes. We basically predicted that we'd get to this point, right?
Yeah. I just didn't think it was all that good.
Just out of interest, has anybody watched any of the 2 episodes we've already had twice?
Yeah.
Okay, and did you feel different on those second viewings?
No.
Because the first one I watched twice, and I think I said something along the lines of, I thought Jodie Whittaker was a bit weak in it. I'm wrong, because I feel now that this is the best she's ever been. She's found her ground and she's found her doctor, and this really did solidify it for me. This episode, she was excellent.
I think she was a lot better in this episode, but I'm going to point something out. I think she was a lot better, and I think a lot of things were a lot better in this episode than they were in either of the last 2 weeks. One of which, last week I talked, you weren't here, Lee, and you don't listen back. So last week I talked a bit about the director's responsibility to the actors to make sure that they always know whereabouts in the story they are and what their context for what's going on around them is. And I didn't think that was happening. And this week, I very much think that was happening. And so this week, I very much thought that the actors were reacting to what's going on around them a lot better than they had been. And this was the first one that's directed by Azur Salim. So, and I don't want to point fingers and say, oh, the director's terrible on the previous 2 weeks. Clearly, that's not the case. But one of the director's responsibilities is this thing I was talking about. And I just thought the director this week made a better job. And I think that's promising because this director is doing episodes 5 and 6 as well. So hopefully that means that when it comes to the episodes that will resolve the story, that little bit more concentration on that aspect of it, which means a lot to me, is going to happen. And next week's episode, which is the one where we do go back to, and his name escapes me, the guy who did the first 2 episodes, is the Angel one, which looks great anyway. So who's going to ruin that? Certainly not the director, right? So I think all looks very promising going forwards from that respect.
It was a very complicated episode for the director, I think, wasn't it? To make sure, like you say, to not only have all the characters reacting properly and where they are in the story, but also they're playing other characters often as well, which can be just as complicated to direct somebody into another character, and then obviously they're doing a take and then replacing that actor with the proper actor, so you're flicking between the two. So you've got to play that twice. You've got to film that twice, and it's got to be not exactly, but almost exactly the same.
Well, I think they're
in timing and pace, at least.
Yeah, I think they're imposing them with special effects rather than having them there on set, Lee, necessarily.
What? So Jodie and
Joe Martin
these women weren't in the car at the same time at different times. That's what I mean.
Oh, right. I thought you were talking about also the Joe Martin stuff as well. It looked like she was superimposed to me.
No, she was on set because she's just released photographs on Twitter from the set.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, fair enough.
Because I thought she might just be in the mirror, but she was actually there with
fair enough.
Flips.
It's about the pace. It's not necessarily them trying to be like the other characters.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't trying to be like the old Doctor. It's just the pace of it's quite complicated. I would imagine it'd give you a right headache. And in amongst all the other billions of different sets and stories that are being told, I thought it was pretty good.
You're not overstating the complexity. They just shoot the same scene twice with two different actors, the same camera position. Because they didn't.
You done directing?
No, but I assume for a director to just move between two takes of different people. I mean, I didn't get the impression that their performances were crafted to match each other.
Yeah, the process is difficult. It's getting the actors to pace it right. You understand, Simon. It's all about rhythm.
And it's also about position. You've got to position them within the frame. And oftentimes it can be half an hour, an hour and a half between shooting one and the other because you've got to reset things. So it's not as simple as just one gets up and the other one sits down.
Yeah, but in terms of special effects, it's not.
We're not talking about special effects. We're talking about performance, Matt.
You are talking about special effects because you're talking about switching between two performers saying the same thing in the same position using a special effect. So I'm just saying I don't think it's
only split screen. It's quite a simple effect, to be honest.
Yeah,
the effect will be simple. It's just getting the actors to pace it right, and it's fine. They've got enough time to do it, but it just feels good that out of the because it's an hour's worth of Doctor Who, which is there's so much going on. I can barely remember what was going on. We've only just watched it, and there's so much going on. To try and get a grip on where that actor is at that point in that script, on that set, on that day, and try and get them exactly at that pacing and at the level and at that energy, it isn't an easy job. Simon and I talked to Saul Metzstein quite a lot about these sorts of things, and he said, things like with Matt Smith, you can't really direct Matt Smith too much because he does his own thing, so you have to ballet round him. But that then throws everything, all their storyboarding up in the air a bit. So you have to do things on the day as well. But this, I can't imagine you can't just improvise this. This is quite a complex run of small stories set together. So you really have to be quite tight with it, I'd imagine. That's what I mean. It's hard
some kind of script for them to follow. So they'd all be saying the same things. But their performances weren't matching. Their pacing wasn't matching. That was the whole point. So it flitted. I mean, Jodie Whittaker was playing a kind of hardcore secret super agent at times, but I'd imagine the instruction to her would be, right, Jodie, for this scene you're playing a hardcore secret super agent, and she plays a hardcore secret super agent, and then in this scene you're not quite sure what's going on, she plays it like that.
But there's a subtlety.
I'm sure there's an absolute skill that I couldn't grasp with acting.
Yeah,
I'm just suggesting that this episode didn't require as much, necessarily more acting skill than, say, there's a squadron of Sontaran over this hill, now react to them. I think you give the actors instructions on where they are in the script and they play it.
No, but it's too subtle for that. Yeah. It's way too subtle for that.
I don't think it was that
imagine playing yourself.
Subtle.
Imagine playing yourself, Matt, but playing yourself as I don't know, a terrorist about to let off a book, but you're doing it as Matt Barber, but who's slightly sweating. Who does, you've got to play yourself, but you're playing someone who's slightly heightened, and and then the next scene you are Matt Barber again, and the next scene after that you are the terrorist. So imagine playing those three parts subtly. It's not easy. It's not easy to do. And I thought you did it all.
I don't think it was done like that. I don't think it was like subtle as that. I don't think this was as smartly put together.
Yeah, well, I'm saying I thought it was because that's what I saw.
There was a lot of bouncing around.
There was,
but I think it fudged it. I think it was a clever script, but I don't think it was a masterpiece in construction.
Be interesting to see what you think second time round.
Yeah, we're not talking about the construction of the story. We're talking about whether the director and the actors
construction of the episode. I'm talking about.
Well, and what we're talking about.
I think the idea that it was disorientating is intentional. I think it was intentionally disorientating. It was supposed to be fragmented, and you are supposed to see each of those scenes and think, oh, that's that little window, and you are disorientated along with the Doctor. Make no bones about it, this was about us being in the Doctor's shoes, where by the end of it we were being taunted along with the Doctor as to a bit more information. When she was saying, I just need to know one more thing, that's exactly what the audience is thinking.
And I thought it
was brilliant.
I liked the disorientation of it, and I liked the kind of chopped up nature of it. I just didn't feel like it had enough wit to mask the fact that actually there was a lot of exposition again, and there was a lot of explaining going on.
There was a lot of explaining.
There was a lot of audio added afterwards to explain where the Doctor's going next.
Yeah,
and in the past two episodes, they've had lots of jokes that have kept me interested and have kind of masked that. In this, there wasn't one joke. There wasn't one bit of wit, apart from perhaps
it wasn't really a joking situation, Matt.
No, I know, but that's what I missed. But
also, I thought it was there was plenty of really funny stuff, especially with John Bishop.
No, I thought he had one of his most serious episodes, didn't he?
He had one of his more serious episodes, but it wasn't entirely with that.
I can't remember. Maybe I should watch it again. I can't remember any humour coming out.
Well, we've literally come right off the back of it, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't laugh out loud at this one.
It's definitely less humorous. And what I would say, because I didn't really say anything about last week's one, the humour last week was so well placed. And I've noticed that it's difficult to get humour, even with a comedian on set. And I think some of the moments from Mary as well, the character Mary, she just says things and they're just on beat. They're just perfect, and it's funny. There's a lovely bit with the captain last week where he puts up his hands and then he goes like, that looks a bit sheepish. I mean, that's hard to kind of get right as well, and you can fudge it up really quickly, which Chibnall has done in the past with others. But comedy is it's difficult, and if you get it right, it can really lighten the situation for a split second. And what you don't want to do is being taken out of it completely, which is what's happened in the last two series, I think.
The one thing I found slightly incongruous was the whole idea of love between these two characters who are obviously connected.
Oh no, I loved that part of it.
Did you like that?
Yeah, very
I liked it in essence, but it kind of, the love word was, which I haven't got a problem with, I like reasons to get blubby in these stories, but it felt a little bit, and I couldn't help thinking, oh, is this the thing that's going to pull everything together? Is this what's going to pull the universe? Yeah, are we back to that love is the answer thing? Which I agree with.
It's a traditional anti-Cyberman weapon.
Yeah.
But at this time, it wasn't used as a weapon against the Cybermen. It was just used as a rejoinder to their motivation. So it wasn't used
and then she shot him.
For anything, really.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And that was a moment of humour.
How good? How good did the Cybermen was though? And we had the Daleks. They hid that away, didn't they?
Yeah.
It looked so good.
I mean, this is the Chris Chibnall's misdirection in the promotion of these episodes is pretty masterful, isn't it? He's doing really well as far as hiding this stuff away before we see it. So
you mean the trailers?
I think
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and the fact that, and obviously they were all there in the form of special effects, so it's very easy just to throw the Daleks in for one episode as a special effect. But nevertheless, in previous years, this is the kind of stuff that might have leaked, and under this regime, that stuff isn't leaking, and more power to them. Well, one of the things that was talked about in the run-up to the series was that they didn't promote it until quite late in the day. But then there was a barrage of promotion just before it started. Surely that's the way you do it. One of the things that I've always said is if you're self-publishing a book, right, or whatever, if you're promoting your podcast, why tell people that the podcast's coming until the podcast's available to download? Why tell people that the book is going to be published unless you can click on the pre-order button or click to order it there and then. Because there's no point in saying, oh, I've got this book that's coming out. When's it coming out? It's coming out in 3 weeks. Well, what's somebody going to do with that information? They can't do anything with that information. Don't give them the information until they can do something with it. If you've got a book that's coming out and you tell people my book's coming out in 3 weeks, this is what's happening in the book, this is the idea for the book, they might get really enthused for the idea for the book. And then 3 weeks later, when it's available to pre-order, they might be really enthused about the idea for something else. And that might be where their money goes. Get them enthused at the point at which they can put their hand in their pocket.
I guess with a high-profile television series, it's slightly different because the number of people interested is so much greater, and so you're trying to create a conversation about it, or speculation, rather than the purchase bit is watching it, isn't it?
At the same time, you want that conversation to be happening in the run-up to the broadcast of the episode, not weeks or months beforehand.
Especially in this day and age.
Yeah. You want you want to give the people the idea that Doctor Who is back on in a week, so that they can spend a week talking about it and getting excited about it and then watch it. You don't want to get them talking about Doctor Who a month before it comes back, because then they'll have a conversation for a week and then they'll be talking about something else for 3 weeks.
It would have been the case 10, 20 years ago, wouldn't it? But I think nowadays a conversation is instant. So yeah, you don't want it to dry up too quickly, or for people to get so fierce that they decide that they hate it before. Oh no, that did happen.
There is another course of action though. If you're publishing your own book and what have you, is to let it come out and then don't shut up about it for a few years following. There is that option, isn't there, Matt?
Yeah, Matt. There is, funnily enough, that option. Crazy idea. What a crazy idea.
I know. He looked around for his book then. Did you see that?
Oh, it's just there.
Oh.
I've got it.
He sleeps with it.
I just happened to be
Under
reading
the pillow.
it myself.
What? That was quick.
He goes through 3 copies a week. Just so you know.
He's even sent me one so I can hold it up too.
Yeah.
Just in case anybody missed it.
They're on offer at the moment.
They were always thinking you bought it yourself, JR. Blimey.
I find it's a bit rough on the bum, but it's quite good.
Let's mention a few things, and I'll get your thoughts on these things. Well, before we do, there are a couple of things. The bits where you had the giant Maury in space, I don't think that quite worked. There were a few things that didn't quite work, right? So the whole, I mean, I thought
was a comic strip. I loved that.
I loved it. Yeah, I absolutely loved it.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought as a special effect, it just looked a bit odd. I thought some of the special effects were absolutely astonishing, and others were right on the borderline of, oh, does this just look a bit silly? And I thought that was on the borderline of looking a bit silly. Anyway, Matt.
Okay.
Jo Martin.
Yep, I liked Jo Martin coming back. I've wanted Jo Martin to come back. I'm glad she came back. I'd now like her to see her come back a bit more.
Thing is, we kind of had a whole episode of Jo Martin's story. It's just that Jodie Whittaker was playing Jo Martin as the story was unfolding. So a lot of the stuff that happened in that episode. And also, this raised a really interesting question, which I must not forget to bring up in a moment. So basically, I know you were saying you wanted to see a Jo Martin story, and what we had here wasn't really a Jo Martin story, but it kind of was, because this was effectively a story of something that the Jo Martin Doctor did. It's just that we only saw her fleetingly throughout it. So did that satisfy you?
No, because I don't want a story about Jo Martin's Doctor. I want Jo Martin in it because I really like her as a performer, and I think she had those moments of humour. She manages to get the humour out of the ridiculousness of the situation. So I mean, I don't think she should have been in this one more. I'm just hoping that we haven't seen the last of her. That one of the specials might feature her as coming back for a third and final visit. I think the quality of her performance justifies having her as a sort of a secondary or main character of her own in the story.
I'll be surprised if she doesn't come back, because they've revealed only one character from the party of 4, So we're going to find out who the other two are eventually.
No. They've revealed 3, Lee.
Have they? Who's the other one?
Yeah. Carvanista is 1. Vinder is 1. The Fugitive Doctor is 1. There's 1 left mysterious. And that's the question I was going to raise.
Oh, Vinder is 1.
Okay. Vinder was there. Yeah. No, I wouldn't swear it, because like I say, we've just come off the back of watching the episode and this is pretty instant.
Yeah, it's complicated because Vinder's in the division, but
Vinder's in the division.
We saw Vinder's first job, which was the weird Serpent King guy, which he then fails, and then he gets sent to Siberia on the Rose Station for the rest of his career. So I wonder,
was that his first job?
Yeah, because he gets
his first promoted job.
Yeah, he gets the Casino Royale moment where he's given his 00 status and his first job.
So maybe
first job with Flux. So it could. It could be.
Maybe I misunderstood that.
But then, if it is, then Vinder would have a lot of that information that the Doctor could then take.
I'm thinking mind wipes are happening.
Okay.
Because people are coming out of... Because this seems to be a thing with the division. The stuff that the division is asked to do is so undercover. You send your agents in, and then when the agents come out, you wipe their minds so that it stays undercover, right? So that's an impression I'm getting about what the division do. And I think I had that impression from the Timeless Children as well.
They wipe the mind once they leave the division rather than presumably after every job.
Well, we don't know.
Well, yeah.
I like the idea that they wipe their mind after every job. So if that doesn't turn up, I would be very disappointed, JR.
Because the point is, if you finish a job and go off on another job, and then that goes tits up and you get captured and they question you, you're going to want to have had your mind wiped so you can't remember the stuff that they're trying to get, right?
I guess so. Yeah. Or alternatively, if you're a secret super spy and you go on a job, you want to remember the skills you received doing that job and then use it in the next
wipe
job.
Itself of the skills.
Okay.
So total recall.
We'll find all this out in the inevitable Big Finish series, won't we?
But this is Doctor Who, right? This is science fiction fantasy, so I think we're splitting the wrong hairs here, quite frankly. All right, so who do we think? Oh no, I didn't really ask Simon or Lee. Were we happy to see Jo Martin back? Was it a surprise, Simon, to see the Fugitive Doctor?
Yes, there were at least 5 oh wow moments where I went, oh wow, oh wow, oh wow, and that was one of the oh wow, yeah.
Oh god, I'm going to have to ask you what the other 4 oh wow moments were.
Oh, I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
It was oh wow with the Daleks. It was, and for me, it was oh wow with that scene with the Doctor floating in front of those large.
Fair enough.
Maoris.
Let's call them Guardians of Time.
I guess if I had an oh wow moment, or one of the moments that made me sit up, was when we saw Carvanista, and when we realised that Jodie Whittaker's Doctor was doing the Jo Martin Doctor's story, was back in, because so for anybody who's listening who didn't follow it, I suppose. So at the end of the last episode, Yaz is about to have the full force of time flow through her because she's standing in for Amori. This episode starts with the Doctor stepping up to take her place because the Doctor thinks she can absorb the time. And so the Doctor steps up, time flows through the Doctor instead of through Yaz. And what the Doctor does in order to protect Yaz and Vinder and Dan is send them back, sort of essentially through their own time streams, so that Swarm and Azure won't be able to find them. But this has the accidental effect of sending the Doctor back through her own time stream as well. So then the story becomes about the Doctor working out how to deal with Swarm and Azure when she gets back to the planet time. And what she realizes is that she's done all this before, because the part of her own time stream that she's accidentally gone back to is the first time she met Swarm and Azure. So when she comes back into normal time, as it were, she simply repeats the actions that she did the first time she met Swarm and Azure, and that's how they vanquish and imprison them for the second time, the same as they did the first time. I mean, that's just broad beats, but that's essentially what we saw, right?
Yeah. What I loved about this is they applied a science that we'd already learned from the Name of the Doctor. So the whole idea of jumping back into your own time stream. We for anyone who's watched the show that long, it makes sense. in the construct of the show.
When you said that you were one of your wow moments was when Carvanista appeared.
Well,
did you not expect, because they called the Dan character a dog?
Yes.
So I was sort
just
of expecting
seconds
that
before,
earlier.
Wasn't it?
Sorry?
I think that was just seconds before, wasn't it?
No. That was about 5 or 10 minutes before.
Or was it? Oh,
yeah,
okay,
and then he was using the Carvanista
It was a
weapon.
hint, wasn't it?
But what I mean was, yeah. Well, okay, I don't mean necessarily when you see Carvanista, but what I mean is when. So between them calling him the dog and and Carvanista showing up physically, I had a "oh wow, this is happening" moment, and that's really what I'm talking about. Because there were several moments. See, those are the things that excite me, when you suddenly get the nod tipped to something that's about to happen, and then the tension is, oh, is it going to happen the way I think it's going to happen now, or is something different going to happen? And those are the bits that excite me, and there were plenty of those too. So, like I say, in that first sort of 10 or 15 minutes, when you were trying to work out what was going on, and just for a second, it looked like it wouldn't make any sense. And then when it started to begin to make sense, that was the bit that really excited me, because the pieces were starting to fall into place. So when you started to get the impression of the Doctor having thrown them back through their own time streams, or into their own memories, as she put it. So I found that stuff really exciting, and I loved the way they did it too, with them, Dan's jumping about through different memories. Vinder, and I see, looking back, is Yaz mostly in the same memory like Vinder is, or is she jumping about too?
I
think she jumps about
she
jumps about a bit, doesn't she? She's got 2, maybe 3. But those were the bits I really enjoyed, because seeing how they were doing that was a bit like I suppose what Stephen Moffat was going to do at the end of the Big Bang, that he didn't actually really get a chance to do, because I think they ran out of budget. So do you remember when the 11th Doctor was going back through Amy Pond's timeline, and essentially they just get 2 bits, the bit in the forest in the Weeping Angel story, and then the bit right back in the 11th hour with the Amy Junior, Amelia, whatever she was called. Originally the plan was for there to be several more bits like that, but I think they ran out of time or budget or something, and I wanted to see more of that. And I think this episode kind of paid off on the promise that Stephen Moffat made back in 2010 in some ways. Not deliberately, but what I mean is, for me, for somebody who enjoys that stuff, this was really playing around in that same sort of, that same game, and I really enjoyed watching it. Barbara Flynn's character, and she is given a name on Wikipedia. I'm sure the stuff on Wikipedia has been put up there by somebody who's actually involved in the production or something, or maybe somebody who works for the magazine who's had preview copies of the episodes, because I don't know if the stuff that we saw, that we talked about last time, was stuff that came from, like Simon says, that episode, or whether it's from somebody who's already seen ahead. And actually, we talked about what the Wikipedia article said about last episode, and about where the flux came from and what it was doing last time. And it turned out not to be what Wikipedia said, didn't it, really? But we'll come back to that. Barbara Flynn's character, she's called Orsock, essentially. I mean, she's in one scene. We don't see or learn terrifically much. I don't know. What did anybody think? Lee, what did you think?
That was really interesting. At first, when I first saw her, I thought she was the woman holding her eyes over her face way back in David Tennant's time. Doctor's mum.
Yeah.
And part of me still thinks it could be her. But she was holding syringes and things. It's almost like she was part of the laboratory experiments early on Gallifrey. I think that might be part of it. I loved the acting. She was great in there. She really had some gravitas, and you believed everything she said, that there's something, to look at the Doctor and just say, oh, honestly, you have no clue what you're talking about, is quite a big thing to try and say as a character in the universe of Doctor Who. But actually, she's just, it felt like, the Doctor knows F all, and this person's like, don't bother, okay, you've seen me now, see you later, bye. There's something else going on much bigger.
Well, this universe is finished. So
yeah, I mean, what happened to the Doctor as a child, the timeless child? What was she escaping from? Why did she fall through the hole? Is this a replicate? Is it the same thing that happened in her universe in this universe? Is it starting to destroy itself? And I don't know. I mean, is it connected in that way? Do you think?
Well, if you'd stop talking and let us get a word in edgeways.
Yeah, let JR talk, so Lee. For once.
But you
I've got about 6 years of talk inside me.
All right, but the question you ask is, or the point you raise is, could that be connected? There's no reason to suppose any of this is connected, because the division, as I pointed out, the division is not connected to the Timeless Child. They're two entirely separate things. The Timeless Child thing happened, and then when the Doctor's older, the division thing happened. So the two aren't necessarily connected, unless Chris Chibnall decides to tell a story in which they are connected. But one thing that possibly you could extrapolate from that is that if this character, and I wonder if this character is more in line of being alongside the Guardians or something like that, something with an overview that even the Time Lords don't have. Maybe if this character is talking about this universe's time being over, and therefore another universe will be born out of the death of this one, possibly, and maybe that's happened before and there was a universe before this one existed. Maybe the Doctor always exists in every universe, and when the Timeless Child appears out of this wormhole, maybe that's not a wormhole from a parallel universe to us or somewhere else in this universe. Maybe that's a wormhole from a universe that previously existed, and the Doctor must always exist in the universe to make sure that the balance of time and space is withheld.
It's quite Matrix, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, if Chris Chibnall wants to answer the question he set up about where does the Timeless Child come from, that, to me, is possibly the only solution he can give that wouldn't upset anybody, because basically it just says this is the Doctor that we know. It's just that this Doctor exists in every universe.
My inclination is he set up the Timeless Child as a way of explaining where the Doctor came from the point that the Doctor was a secret super spy to now, rather than where does that Timeless Child come from. I think I think he put that in because he knows that some mystery is still good, and there'll be fans who say, but you've taken out all the mystery of Doctor Who, and so he's added a bit of an extra layer of mystery. She must be. Well, yeah. She struck me as being. I mean, I thought initially she was the Doctor's mum to start with, like Lee, and then I assumed she was Tecteon, and now I'm, even though we've got a name on Wikipedia, I'm still pretty sure that that's a possibility, that she's kind of at the center of this division, because they'd have this kind of advanced knowledge of what's going on and this sort of heightened knowledge.
They'd care. They'd care about whether the universe gets destroyed, because the division exists within this universe and would be destroyed along with this universe. I think she's way above all that, because she's talking about this universe being destroyed in a way that suggests that she isn't going to be affected by that.
Possibly. She was white. Maybe she's the White Guardian, like you say.
So I got the impression that the division is a kind of a Time Lordy thing, but a Time Lordy thing with sort of more of an inclination to intervene in things, and so they have more of a kind of an overall intelligence of the universe and what's going on. So, and that was what her dialogue. She didn't come across as a god to me in her performance or in the way she was framed or a dialogue. She came across as being a bit like Judi Dench in Casino Royale.
Yeah. So I don't think she. Yeah, you're right. But so I don't think she is a god. But what I mean is, I think she seems to have more oversight than somebody who was in something like the Division would have. Mm-hmm. She seemed to have more oversight than somebody who's involved in events have.
And she didn't.
I don't know. It just felt like that to me.
She was very matter of fact about the end of the universe. So who is she to not be worried about it?
Yeah. So
but again, it's a bit like the architect in Matrix Revolutions, Revolutions. I get them mixed up.
I've not seen it since it came out, so might be about to correct that before we get to the new one coming out. Okay, let's talk about some slightly more mundane stuff, I guess. Some of the things that the characters did. The one character we've not seen a lot of, and we briefly mentioned the love story, but Vinder's backstory and the explanation for why he's on that, outpost at the start of the first episode. I think that's something that people didn't really expect to see explained necessarily. We did get it explained. I thought the explanation for it was very satisfying in a so this is what happens kind of a way. It felt quite. Also, part of that story felt quite timely as well. This guy, the Grand Serpent or whatever, you must turn the recording off so that I can offer these people's lives in exchange for this deal I want to broker. That just felt like a Tory government, didn't it? That felt like well, not necessarily a Tory government or our Tory government.
I was thinking Putin more than...
Yeah, well, yeah. But it definitely felt like it was a commentary on the politics of our times, I thought.
I think it was a good vignette. I thought I quite liked those scenes, the way they were performed. I didn't think I needed to know where Vinder came from, and I still am not convinced I needed to know, but it gave a good opportunity for some political satire, which is good. Yeah, it was fine. I didn't get the impression when I was watching it that these are like more things driving this 6-part story forward. It felt like I was seeing a bit of Vinder's backstory just before he goes off on his own side mission at the end.
Yeah,
but also
that is the thing. It's not. Somebody said it was pointless to me, and I thought, well, it's not pointless, but I kind of understand that this whole episode is about vignettes. It's about small stories about people, and mostly about Vinder.
This episode is about characters.
Yeah. About characters
and that's
who
what
they
it
are.
was. It was character. It was so we know who the other characters are. We know who the Doctor and Yaz are. This episode was about telling us more about who Dan and Vinder are.
Yeah, it was kind of mostly about character, but it was also about suspending Jodie Whittaker on Kirby wires so she can explain what's happening halfway through the 6-part story.
Oh, the Jacob Marley moment was brilliant, wasn't it? Just hanging about.
Yeah. Fun. Simon.
Yes.
Vinder's backstory.
Well, I thought I was going to say, when we first see Vinder, he's on the space station, isn't he? That little thing, and we literally see him through Devinder. So maybe that's where he got his name from. And that's about as intelligent as I go with it. I wonder, maybe I'm doing that fan thing of looking for reasons when there aren't any in connections. Is the unborn child, something important?
How did she describe it? She said there was a line of dialogue.
Still unborn, she said.
Unborn. Oh, okay.
Yeah. She said it's our still unborn child.
Okay.
It is a slightly...
I thought she said our Azure child, which is there's a character called Azure. I made connections at that point. But I didn't realise she said my unborn child, because that's a terrible thing to say.
I have to say all these different names, or I have been looking for meanings amongst them, and I'm not doing very well at all.
They're Ravagers, aren't they, now? We're assuming the race is called the Ravagers. Okay.
Or if not necessarily the race, their sort of group, their whatever you want to call it. Okay. Like with the Silence. Do you remember with the Silence? And it turned out, and it was explained in A Good Man Goes to War, and people seem to think it was some kind of a revelation in the Christmas... What was it called? Not Christmas Invasion. The one, Matt Smith's last episode, Time of the Doctor. That seemed to be a revelation to some people, that it was a sect rather than a species. But that was explained in A Good Man Goes to War.
Well,
I wonder if this is the same, is what I'm saying.
That's six years ago. You're still.
What I will say is that, and on our last episode, we were talking about whether Swarm and Azure are going to be shown to be more than just bad guys, but I'm not really seeing much sign of that. Certainly with Swarm, he just seems to be determined to be a bit of a shit.
They did have a walk onto the set to say, Doctor, you think you've foiled our plan, but we have more cunning plans up our sleeve.
I intend to reign in hell, which those aren't the words of somebody who
goodbye until next time, Doctor.
Yeah, pretty arch.
I like the old one, the old guy. I liked his performance. He's described as Old Swarm on Wikipedia, which is why I'm now not not too convinced by Orsock on Wikipedia, because was he supposed to be an older version of that one character, or was he just an older Ravager?
Good point. Don't know. I think it was the same character, wasn't it?
Ravager was the butler on To the Manor Born, wasn't he?
It is the same character, isn't it?
Sleep deprivation. I mean, I guess it must be. And then he kind of regenerates.
It's a time thing, isn't it? Yeah.
I do like these villains. They're great, but I hope we get just a little bit of extra dimension to them. I'm feeling they, especially in by the end of this episode, they became a bit more 2D than I was expecting. But it's good to have some villains back. Let's just hope they come back and do something. I mean, what was the thing about the passenger, by the way? Who were the souls inside the passenger? Is it like a TARDIS, a human thing? What is it?
Yeah, it's like a human TARDIS.
Oh.
It's a conveyance. Yeah, we talked last week about now the passenger's been introduced, there will be an explanation for it. I wasn't expecting it to come quite so quickly, and I wasn't expecting it to be, I would say, prosaic. It's not really prosaic, but it's sort of prosaic. But it's a body that contains other bodies.
Having suggested to Lee that the origin of the timeless child isn't necessarily the important thing, you did suggest last week that the passenger could be turn out to be the timeless child.
In fact, the passenger could be the Absorbaloff.
Yeah.
Well, it could be anything and everything, couldn't it? That's kind of the point.
Well, wasn't it Alien Bodies, the Virgin book? They had a walk-in TARDIS, if I remember right.
Compassion.
A walk-in TARDIS.
A walking with a G.
Called Compassion, wasn't she?
Yeah. Which I thought was a great idea.
And the Doctor's Wifely on telly, they had a walking TARDIS.
It's true.
Lee, while we're here, I'm going to just briefly interject. And what I'm going to do, because you missed being here last week, I'm going to ask you for, in 60 seconds, your thoughts on War of the Sontarans.
Epic, awesome, wonderful, funny, great science fiction, really good tale told in the time it had, and great characters, brilliant setting. Sontarans being Sontarans again. It was fantastic. I'll give it a 10 out of 10. Do you want me to talk anymore?
We'll do that in 15 seconds then. Why not? That'll do. Why not?
I loved it. One of the best things I've seen in ages.
So here's an interesting thing for you. I looked on Gallifrey Base briefly. I don't sort of dwell on these things too much, especially as forums these days are becoming a bit more sparsely populated thanks to the dominance of things like Facebook and Twitter. But they do have a vote on Gallifrey Base for every episode. And I'd like to have a look because I think that gives an indication of what fandom in general is thinking, as opposed to a sort of more general public idea that you get from the AI score. And you do get a lot of people who vote in these polls who don't throw their opinion all over social media or all over the forum. So I have noticed that even if the actual comment threads themselves are filled with negative opinions or whatever, that won't be reflected in the vote. The vote will always be a lot more of a sort of more objective slice of the feeling than the comments will be. War of the Sontarans got really good scores, really high scores. I mean, what they get to do is you either score it 1 up to 10 and they show which percentage scored on each number. War of the Sontarans, there's always scores from everything from 1 to 10, but below about 4 or 5 there were very few, and above 4 or 5 the numbers just got bigger and bigger. It got a very high score. Both the first episode and this one have got much more diverse set of scores. So a lot of people scored both episodes lower, and although still on the balance, and because this is Doctor Who fans, so generally speaking, apart from the vocal minority, most of them are inclined to like it. So still a big majority preferred the first and third episodes to didn't like the first and third episodes. Still, it's a lot more balanced. And I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about, and in the first episode as well, when I talked about it being an incomplete story, so it therefore being less satisfying as a whole. So I wonder if we're seeing a really strange kind of Doctor Who that we've not really had in this century, where you can be less satisfied with something but more engaged with it at the same time. Because generally speaking, a lot of people who hadn't liked this sort of period of Doctor Who so far are posting things about how much more engaged they are with it and how much more they are enjoying it. But obviously, like I say, we haven't seen the end of the story yet. And so in terms of being satisfied by it, I think people are still sort of open-minded with no idea, I suppose, whether they're going to be satisfied by it in the end or whether it might end up disappointing them after all. But yeah, I definitely think this 6-part storyline that Chris Chibnall's done now is engaging fandom at the very least a lot more. Like I say, I think it being on BBC One feels really weird because this does feel now like a sort of, it's leaning into sort of cult sci-fi territory with these kind of storylines going on. I think having people like Dan in it and giving the sort of that storyline between Vinda and what's she called, Belle, that felt like it was drawing the YA audience a bit more, and I really, really enjoyed that. But yeah, I think we're seeing a different kind of Doctor Who, and we knew we were going to, but we didn't know how far Chris Chibnall was going to lean into it. And like I say, I think last week's episode kind of gave us a hint as to what the standalone episodes might look like. This one very definitely felt like something that was written specifically for this series. So Lee, we've not really heard a lot from you because we didn't hear from you last week. But in terms of it being 645s or 650s, I guess, and 60s, how do you think it's going overall?
It's working really, really well for me. I think the placing of the whole arc is good. I know that Matt said a few weeks ago he'd be upset if the main plot was dropped and we just get separate episodes. And I don't think that's happened. I think we have got. You can watch them in isolation, but you would really need to have seen the other ones. You can't start on number 3 or you can't start on number 2. I think the whole setup and the entire kind of swarm and the whatever the hell it is. What's the thing? What's the Galactus called again?
Swarm.
No, the big thing, the chaotic thing, eating planets.
Oh, the Flux.
Flux.
It's there in the title.
It's a terrible name. It's a terrible name. I'm always going to forget that name. Anyway,
Flux.
The Flux. I was a bit disappointed. We've only seen a bit of that. I'm sure we're going to see some more of it. But he set so much stuff going on, and there are so many bits and pieces to pull together. And so far, over the 3 episodes, it's felt seamless. It doesn't feel. I don't feel it is messy. I don't feel it's pointless. I don't feel it's not going anywhere. It's going the right direction for me. It's got the right energy. It's got the right excitement. I'm really engaged. Honestly, I haven't had moments where my mouth's gone for such a long time. And when the Daleks popped up, I was like, wow, and they're hovering. This is great. And it just made me think that part actually, and when the Doctor's in front of the 3 gods almost. That was just so comic strip, and I thought, oh, it'd be great to have those, the Dalek Empire as a series. That would work. You could have a series of Eternals. You could have a series where Vinda goes off and does his own thing. It suddenly gave me that feeling that we had with Russell T Davies when it had the possibilities of having a spin-off series that would work and not actually necessarily be a bit crappy around the sides. So I don't know. There's a lot to get through. We need to see what the other 3 are like to see the whole package. But you know what I'm really sad about is that when we say 6 episodes, and I know it's just the way it is, but 6 episodes in very old Doctor Who days was one of John Pertwee's episodes, wasn't it? Or Adventures, like Inferno or whatever.
That was twice as long.
And twice as long. But
these are twice as long, Lee.
Are
3
they?
of these would make up 3 of these would make up a John Pertwee story.
Oh,
this was 625s. These are 650s.
Wow, right. The War Games plus all the other ones in that season. But do you know what I mean? It's like it when you say it out loud, it doesn't feel like a lot. But actually, I think what's happened is the choice is really good. It's ready to make that transition to the Netflix world, to the new audiences. The YA thing was perfectly situated, and it was really easily handled. It wasn't too over the top. Although I do hope we get a bit more that storyline. No, I think it's working really well. We've scored it really highly, I think, between us all, and we're engaged and we're enjoying it. I'd really like to know what kids are thinking about this, actually.
So Simon, I know we have talked about it, but we're at the midway stage. Let's have a few minutes on how do we feel it's going so far. Is it working so far as a storyline?
I think it is. It feels very dense, and it feels very rich and well thought out. And I think the pacing's great. I think each episode is doing its job. I certainly think this latest one is certainly doing its job, in as much as it's enticing us. We want to know more as to whether. I would hope that a lot of these threads will all be answered by the end of the season. I'm assuming that not all will be, but it will be to a satisfying degree. So I'm much like Lee, though. I don't think I've had this much fun watching Doctor Who in a very long time, and I can't ask for more really than that. It's all credit. I would almost say that if my facts are correct, that the pandemic, one of these double-edged sword things, although we're getting fewer episodes, it's what's the word? It's kind of condensed things down and it's filtered stuff out that
sharpened it.
It's sharpened it, for Chris Chibnall to focus and work completely on these 6 episodes to give us something that we've not seen before and is working really, really well. I think it's a real bonus to be getting this after the delay and whatever everyone's been through. I think it's I think all credit to the team who've put it together under really difficult circumstances. It just feels, at no point, like, as you said, I think in the last episode, did you say about where they're filming EastEnders, and you suddenly they're having to film things.
Yeah, the
you can physically see how they're having to film a lot of these scenes, and in Coronation Street as well. And you never get the sense that this is being created within a pandemic at all. So,
and just very quickly, the other thing, I mean, maybe it's because of the pandemic as well, that you're having a lot more CGI thrown at it. The episodes are condensed to 6. You got a bit more money to throw at it. CGI is much better now. But seeing the armies of Cybermen, seeing the armies of Sontarans, just massive. That big Merseyard dock scene was so much better than, say, the Masters. Apparent kind of rocket silos and things. They just look realistically brilliant, and it's epic. It's like the Lord of the Rings. You can see thousands of troops coming in one direction, but it doesn't seem hokey. And that to me is where Doctor Who has always wanted to be. It's always wanted to have that epic scale, in there somewhere, and they've never been able to quite do it. That's why I always think the Gallifrey, Time Wars and things like that don't feel quite epic, because you just don't see the epicness. You're only in one part of it, and that's what they had to do. But now you can show it, and those Cybermen just wandering around, thousands of them, like Roman centurions, was mind-blowingly good.
It was nice that we saw the outside of the city this time, because last episode we were saying that we only saw that one room, didn't we? And there was no sense of scale. But now we've seen it. So, do we think it's possibly Gallifrey?
No, I don't think so.
Somewhere different.
I suppose there's a tiny chance of it, but no. It's the planet Time. They've said it.
Yeah, so but could it have had the name Time before Gallifrey?
Could have. I was just about to make that point. Could be that Gallifrey was built out of the planet Time, but you don't get that impression, because Gallifrey is the place where the what were they called, the old Gallifreyans? Shibogans evolved, and then they became Time Lords after they discovered the secret of time. I suppose it could be a story that the Shibogans evolved on a planet that they called Gallifrey, that turns out to have been the planet Time after the original inhabitants died off, or whatever. I don't know. That's not impossible, and I suppose there'd be a kind of romance about that, and that would explain why Time Lords of all species have got such a mastery of the idea of time travel.
There was a moment when we had the
You'll get your summing up that, I promise.
Okay.
There was a moment where there was the close up on the Cyberman, on the eye, when it was talking and that, and suddenly, ironically, I was thrown back to the style of a Cyberman. I don't know why. I think it's the design, but also we're suddenly focusing on them, and it felt like one of the strongest Cyberman moments there had been. I don't know quite what it was. I do really want to watch all these again. I think this series is going to be possibly the most rewatched of any Doctor Who series.
There was a lovely shot when she shoots the Cybermen and she steps out and they're all on the ground and one of them suddenly just clunks down a bit. Yeah. And the way its head falls and tilts and then stops just felt...
Yeah, having moments like that, which could have been cut, make a big difference to the personality of the episode.
Yeah, it's a tiny moment. It doesn't really mean anything. And yet such care and attention has gone into the exact way that the Cyberman does that and the exact way its head falls for the camera to catch it in such a way that it looks... it's... Anyway, Matt, I promised I'll get back to you, but I'm just going to very quickly throw a thought out. I kind of wish we'd seen Stephen Moffat being able to do a 6-part story as opposed to arc stories that were spread amongst... Because imagine what Stephen Moffat could have made of a story where he leans into the idea of it being continuing from one week to the next. And I hope we get to see Russell T Davies do that, because I think in some ways this is so successful that I would imagine there must be a temptation from Russell T Davies to continue doing it, or at least to try his own version of it. Matt, how do you feel it's going so far?
I don't think Time's going to come back. I can't see Time turning into Gallifrey, because I can't see how they would actually present that in terms of the story, other than, as I said about the Timeless Children, other than as a PowerPoint presentation at the end of the series, which I doubt they do. Also, I think we've seen the last of Time. How do I feel it's going?
Maybe. Okay, while you're collecting your thoughts, I'll say one thing.
No, I've collected them.
Oh, okay. Well,
go on.
I'll say this one. I just, I like post-apocalyptic things where the survivors have to gather themselves together and survive what's happened and build afresh. And there's very much a feeling in this, and the pre-credits bit in this episode, especially, I loved for leaning into that. And we got a lot more of it too when Vinda gets dropped off home. Going back to what Lee was saying, we're not seeing a lot of the flux. No. They could have done it one of two ways, really. The whole series could have been about the flux happening or about the build-up to the flux happening. But he's decided on doing the flux happens at the start, and then we live in the aftermath of that. And these are the survivors of the flux. And we see what happens to them in the aftermath of the flux. And I really like that, because that's my sweet spot. So I love that he's doing a series that's looking at that. So, Matt.
So I agree with that Lee said, when's the flux coming back into it? And I think the flux has happened. And what we're dealing with is the aftermath of the flux is just an apocalypse that's happened. So we're dealing with the aftermath of it. What I would say is I like sort of post-apocalyptic dramas, but they're generally at their best just after the apocalypse, and then they go off the boil slightly when they try to survive. And I don't think I'd be interested to see how this deals with a universal apocalypse and actually presents that and actually deals with that. I thought it's going fine. I thought it sort of dropped the ball with this episode in terms of a 6-part story, because they start the story by presenting this big threat to Time, and then they kind of conclude it with the main villains of the piece kind of stalking in and then evaporating off. If it wasn't for the look of next week's and for the promise of next week's episode, I would have been slightly more disconcerted by it. I felt like this episode could have been when everything falls apart completely and then they have to piece it all back together again, which it kind of is. But it sort of presented everything falling apart as the result of what's happening on Time. And I think that storyline has been resolved. Not just the mystery, but the storyline has been resolved of what's happened on Time. So I'm not expecting, I kind of don't expect to see the big Time Guardians, the Mori, coming back. I just got the impression that they've been stabilized, and now the Doctor can deal with the spatial apocalypse rather than the temporal apocalypse.
Well, do you remember I said last week the structure of this felt to me like it might replicate the structure of Series 6, where the mystery of who is River Song takes up the first half, and then we find out, and the second half is about something else that related.
Yeah.
So the first half of this series has been about, well, as you say, this disruption in time that now seems to be, to a degree, resolved. But this has set up a mystery for the second half, and that is the idea that the flux happened because of the Doctor.
Yeah.
So now the mystery for the second half is one where we move into something much more personal and much more individual. That is sort of classic Stephen Moffat territory, where he'll have the Pandorica opens. It's this big, expansive thing about all the creatures from all across time and space are gathering in one place for some mysterious reason. And then the second half is 4 people running around a museum, and it's all much more personal, but it relates. And so I think, for better or worse, I think this is Chris Chibnall doing Stephen Moffat much more than he's done before, and that's really appealing to me. I certainly want to see where it goes.
Oh yeah, I like that mystery. I just don't think it's matched with a kind of a villainous threat. Lee said it's good to see villains back in Doctor Who, and I think, is it? Because they're literally, at the moment, they are Tim Shaw's still, and I was hoping.
Come on,
I've
seriously?
always been hoping. Well, what have they done?
It doesn't matter. He's so good.
No, it does matter.
He's so good.
They're really bored. No, I don't think he is. I
He's got shoulder pads.
I thought the old Swarm was a better actor. I thought he was doing a kind of 1980s kind of Anthony Ainley performance.
Right, we're starting to repeat ourselves, so let's give this a score and we'll move on. Matt, you go first.
Yeah. It's either a 6 or a 7. I think I'm going to give this a 6.
Wow.
Because I think it has dipped from last week. Just no jokes, no levity, no humour. Well, just when it needed it as well, because it was a serious episode, and it was kind of, it was trying to keep people on board despite the relative complexity. And it needed that kind of levity to keep people on board, and there just weren't any jokes in it.
Lee,
it's a big drop, isn't it? I think our cliffhangers are back as well, which is great, isn't it? 9 out of 10. It wasn't as fun, and it was a linear episode last week, and that was really fun. This was. Oh, actually, it was linear, wasn't it? It wasn't really going anywhere. I loved it, but it's not quite War of the Sultanas, is it? Or the Sultanas.
Simon.
I was going to say that I don't know where the jokes could have gone if they were in there, but I suppose they could have been. I think writing that, I just don't know where I would have found the levity in it. But I just thought it was great. Drip feeding information, maybe left me wanting more and to learn more and to slowly feel and to have a really nice tension in my stomach that I don't think I've had from Doctor Who for a very long time, if at all. Sorry?
I said wind.
Wind. Oh yeah, possibly. So yeah, I think it was doing a very difficult job of doing almost like a bridging episode between stuff happening here and I think rewatching will make you realise that how much was going on in there. There was an awful lot going on, and it was moving the story forward in ways that we don't realise, even though it seemed fragmented. I think it's another 9.
Fair enough. I was kind of dreading this one because I had a horrible feeling this one might be the cheap one in the middle of the series that all takes place in a series of like 3 or 4 sets around this planet time, and I wasn't expecting it to be quite that, but I did worry that it might be largely that. And the episode that I got instead didn't just surprise me by not being that, or surprise me, but at least it was better than what I was expecting for because of that reason, but it was also better than what I was expecting because what it replaced that with was something that I really, really enjoyed. And I was thinking, well, this is probably an 8 out of 10 then, like the War of the Sontarans, which I gave an 8 out of 10 last week, Lee. But then I thought, well, no, hang on, because my one complaint about War of the Sontarans was something that I addressed at the start of this episode and that I say they fixed. So on that note, I have to give it a 9 as well. So it's a 9 out of 10 from me. Now we won't be as quick next time. So I think our next episode is going to be like a week on Monday or something like that. So we'll be back for that when we can. And again, we'll have the video up on the evening that we record. And then the audio episode will go out the following morning. Next up, the Angels one. Something to look forward to. Until that happens, I was JR.
I was Lee.
I was Matt.
I was Simon.
And we will speak again soon.
Don't blink.